I wanted to have a discussion around DevSecOps because I come from a background a little bit with software development. I used to teach cloud providers training courses. So I was really interested that at the end of our last roundtable, we started talking about automation and the need to be continuously validating security posture. Well, we came at it from a security and password kind of view. But that's the same concepts that we have in DevSecOps, that as we're building new versions of our software, we need to build into that automated pathway the actual security overview, the security governance of that software. But my question to you as security professionals, do you see that happening? Is anybody actually building security properly into their CI/CD pipelines? Are we getting secure code deployed out into production?
I would say not. Certainly not consistency or any one big movement. Part of it is DevSecOps has kind of suffered from the shift left paradigm, which in concept is good. Let's move security earlier into the process. But I think we're at a point now where I feel like it's the old days in security where we said, firewall, you good. The control list, access control list, you good? If we got all the check boxes, right? And that's kind of happened in software where are we scanning for vulnerabilities? Are we writing good code, et cetera? We're at a point now, the way I've kind of redefined for myself, DevSecOps is you have to think of the software development lifecycle end to end, just like you would a system or a network or anything else, right? What are all the points of attack surfaces that you have to protect, both internally and externally, not just externally. But the other half of the coin is you also have to protect the platform that's happening on, which is the tool chain, the pipeline, whatever you want to call that, including the sources of code that are coming from third-party repositories, well as things that you write, et cetera, and things that can be injected anywhere along the line. I think there's recognition now that we have to secure that, and vendors are doing that, and larger organizations are also working on kind of the software supply chain part of, as well as the AppSec part of it. But I think we're still early in our understanding of how to really, truly secure software, and it isn't a point in time. Is it secure or not secure? Software is not a solid, it's a fluid. It's like water. It's constantly changing. It's patching here, adding a new release here. Data is changing. AI model is being updated. An infinite number of things are changing in that system. So we have to treat it just like we would, a cloud that we're trying to protect. That infinite number of things are happening within it, and the evolution of those attacks are all happening at the same time. So my message is take the principles that we know from security. We've kind of learned the lesson pretty well about thinking and check boxes in isolation and think of it as a system. And both, at least from those two dimensions of software and its infrastructure security and the environment it's created in, it's got to be secure. That's what I think we have to move to.
And just to piggyback off what you said, I've said this, at multiple podcasts, other tech field day events. Right now, will we get there? Yes, but we also don't have, not at least that I've seen or places I've been, we don't have dedicated just to focus on the DevOps side of security, right? Because we're still doing the, jack of all trades wearing 20 different hats. So we could look at it, but it gets pushed to the side because we still have to focus on, the general network, virtualization, a few other key areas of our, day-to-day infrastructures or monitoring clients' infrastructure. So we don't, I guess, get to really give it the kind of attention it should be.
So Gerard, are you seeing that as the perspective of being the security professional in the organization, not able to collaborate very well with the sort of software development, the DevOps end of the world?
Yeah, right now, I'll be honest, right now where I'm at, it's incredible. But prior to that, it was never really a component. It was never something, it was kind of something we knew was there, but it was just we'll address it later on. So it's one of those things where we're getting there and we're just getting better at it.
And so I see that as being an element where security often has been bolted on at the end as the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. As we've discussed earlier, the remediation of known issues only occurs when we've had an exploit and when there's a financial cost to us. and that we're not getting out in front of this and being preventative around it. The same way that password policies are essentially about preventing intrusion, getting in front of scanning for vulnerabilities, avoiding the repo squatting that Mitch was addressing from some of that front end, making sure we're bringing good code into our organization. Does anybody really end up with that full shift left? Are developers that interested in making sure their code is secure? Because AWS says security is job zero, it's everybody's job. But of course, Corey Quinn then says, no, nobody's actually doing it because it's everybody's job.
I don't think the problem's a developer problem. I mean, there certainly are skill levels or lack of skill at understanding how to create secure code or not create an unsecure code. But the amount of code we write as part of our applications is pretty small. I mean, it's probably in the single-digit percentages of all the code that we're operating, whether it's us, our providers in the cloud, or whatever we're operating in. So scanning our code, that we're writing, or checking it through, in the IDE as we're creating it, or downstream through testing tools, are things we still have to do. But that's like saying the firewall's safe, but I don't know what we're doing for anything else in the network, right? To me, the security model is broken. It's not a risk management model. It's a risk loss model, right? Because breaches happen, malware, malicious code will happen. There is no way to prevent it, just other than if you think there's theoretically you could get it all fixed and then statically keep it the same and never let it be exposed to anything else, which there's no system like that. So it's a matter of same thing you think about software development and your software you're creating. It's where is our biggest risk? Where can we, and not only where's our biggest risk, where can we make the most immediate impact? Maybe it's working with a vendor who will look at the code repositories we're going to pull code from, for whether it's Maven or Java or Python directories, Python repositories, and say we can solve that easier than trying to fix it ourselves. So let's address that issue. That's one of 100 things we can do, but we can do that in days, not years, right? It may not be the top issue, but it certainly adds to the overall protection. So that's why I think it's a risk loss, right? There are going to be vulnerabilities, there are going to be security issues, there are going to be malware. And I'm an advocate of one of our best security defenses is the speed at releasing code. Not because we need to release into production 20 times a day like Netflix does or whoever, but the day we need to release something in minutes, I want to be able to do it, right? And I don't want it to be the first time we've ever tried it. That is part of our security process too, so.
Yeah, I definitely see that ability to deploy code in an agile way, and I'll talk some more about that in my Ignite talk tomorrow, as being a central part of being able to actually secure your environment. So do we feel that no matter how good we're being at DevSecOps and security in general, that, as Mitch says, those compromises are inevitable, that we can never make a system that is sufficiently secure? Are we comfortable? I'm coming from an infrastructure side where we look at the security team and think these guys can make everything impenetrable if I follow all of their recommendations.
Well, it all goes back to the security in depth. It doesn't matter whether it's software or anything else. We have to make sure that all of the holes in the Swiss cheese don't align so that we can actually have that problem. Because we need to have the belts, the suspenders, maybe some other devices in between that keep the bad things from getting all the way through.
So it's
as Mitch was saying, I mean, there's constant movement and change. Right. You're not really, I mean, it's a nice statement to say that you're in control, but I think the more realistic approach is to understand that there's always something that just happened and you're not aware of it. You're not really ready for it, but again, to echo what Mitch was saying, you should be able to respond quickly. For any type of incident. And that really helps you in the longer term to get to a better posture just by being able to respond a lot quicker to that incident.
Kind of maps into a little bit of what I see in DevOps bringing back to that DevSecOps idea, that when you actually start implementing DevOps principles and DevSecOps principles, you recognize that your production deployment is actually a test environment. No matter how many test environments you have before that, production is the ultimate test where the rubber hits the road. And that this is where you need to be able to be well instrumented and to be well observed. You need to know what the heck is going on and is going on that shouldn't go on in production. And that should then be feeding back into the development cycle. This is a core part of DevOps, right? Is the feedback at every stage, the ability to be notified if there's an issue coming on. Maybe there's a vulnerability that has just been discovered that's found in your deployed production environment. That's got to feed back into the DevOps pipeline to get that new version of the library, new version of code back out.
It's a really good point. I was just on a webinar talking about observability's use in testing. And one of the observations was observability's evolved from an ops tool to a security tool to now being used in development and in testing. And if you thought about all the things we've learned from using Splunk or whatever tool as part of our security SecOps practices, that learning can be now reinvested into, well, how do I instrument code for security telemetry, not just quality telemetry or production performance telemetry or whatever, or functionality, but are there aspects of security? So can development go talk to SecOps and say, let's look at what you're learning from, and you've come to us to fix these issues, or whatever organization's doing that. So I think that's one of the areas where we can, again, not put it on the developers or not put it on the security people to say, we've learned a lot by using some of these technologies. How can that be applied to make what we do better, not just more secure? Make it more secure, however you're going to do that. Well, let's do that with some real data.
Yeah, and that whole principle of getting the better code, the improved code out into production is central to DevOps, and definitely the recognition that the tools you use to look at your test environment should be giving you that same insights into your production environment. And by the way, the tools you use in your production environment, you should definitely be using to validate your test environment. Because if your test environment doesn't closely replicate production, you don't have good fidelity for testing, and no matter whether it's functional testing, performance, or security testing. Drew, you've been sitting there thinking and ruminating. Has there been something that's caught you in this?
A couple of things. One is, like Ziv mentioned, I think the security industry as a whole has gradually shifted from prevent to speed of response. And I think that's a smart move because you can't be 100% successful. So that speed of response, that flexibility, resiliency is really important. And that's obviously part of DevOps as well, that we need to respond to either a new customer demand or a security vulnerability to get a fresh batch of code out there. I was also just thinking about that KDC cartoon of like all the blocks, and then the one little thing that's holding it up is like, you know, some library somewhere that it's just one person working on it and has been for 30 years. And that's also one of the challenges we're working with. We say software, but it's like not a uniform thing. It's lots of pieces coming from all places, some outside of probably a lot outside of your organization that you don't have control over. And that just complicates the issue.
Yeah, and that hits back on Mitch's comments about the going back to the source code, that most of the source code isn't coming from your organization, it's being brought in from the outside. And we saw this with some of the challenges around OpenSSL over the years. There just aren't enough developers with enough time on this. Is that fundamentally a problem that we're getting with open source and commitment to open source? I'm starting to have a sort of flashback to the WP engine problems that we're currently experiencing. But let's stick back towards DevOps and DevSecOps. Where was I going to go next? Repository scanning, pinning. There's a whole lot of best practices that we see in software development that we find that people aren't following. I'm absolutely guilty of this. I've been documenting a journey of moving an application from being installed on Windows, on Linux machines towards containers and Kubernetes and onto a cloud service. And I've taught the best practices that I've failed to follow. Is this also what's going on? Are people failing to follow best practices? I think JJ was talking about best practices for password cycling, that people simply fail to follow best practices or make exceptions to best practices just because it's much quicker and easier.
Yep.
Does this continue to be a problem with humans?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I think that Tom nailed it. People are lazy. That's exactly the reason for everything.
Or we could say people want to be maximally efficient if we want to spin it a little.
Yeah, and I can also replace that word with convenience, and I can replace it with many other words.
Don't replace it.
Are-
I say that word.
Are they lazy or are they just overwhelmed with too many things to do all the time?
I can replace that with overwhelmed as well. But at the same time, I think for the ones that that they have the tools to make to create something that is secured by design, and they choose not to because of whatever reason, that just in my opinion just circles back to the root cause of everything. It's people involved, and more than often they choose the easy way to get where they want to be.
Well, is it, again, coming back to that idea that we're seeing the same thing in companies as we do in humans, that there is a limited resource somewhere, we're incented to complete some objective, and we'll use as little of our limited resources as possible to achieve the stated objective. I had a manager very early in my career who said, be very careful what you incent your staff to do, because they will do it. They will do exactly what you incent them to do, not what you intended them to do. And this is absolutely human behavior, and companies are large groups of humans behaving in exactly this way. How do we make it easier then? What can we do to make it easier to get security as a foundational part? That idea that as we're making changes anywhere in our organization, be it infrastructure changes or software changes, how do we make it easier for security to be baked in there? That the easy path is the secure path, rather than the easy path being the hard-coded password for a service account that has domain administrator privileges, just because we know then it's not that set of permissions that are a problem.
So what I've seen, and I think it's a healthy approach, is to create processes that really I would say align with everyone's work, and have proper controls in place. So when I use a certain tool to initiate a change, whether it's part of a pipeline or not, there's the list privilege approach should be baked pretty much into everything we do. And again, whether it's possible, or if we actually need to switch to systems that would enable us to I would say make the steps to get there, because that one is really difficult to make that shift. That's a really difficult move for a lot of companies, and obviously the employees alike. But I think that can be a great start to create some sort of an alignment and have transparency on how change management looks like. And then we can gradually step to start having the conversation of what success looks like in terms of the complete process.
One of the things that I see as a challenge is you start trying to implement least privilege, and you find that the mature security models are incredibly granular, and working out required privilege can be very difficult. I would love to see some profiling tools that allow us to execute the code, or at least scan the source code and identify, here is the minimum privileges for this code to run successfully. When you've got 400 different privileges that are in your security model, it's not something I want to have to nut out for myself.
But at the same time, I think we can all agree that we need to get there in order to get that, to move a step in the right direction. So whether it's us, representing companies, talking to companies, trying to bring that up to the surface as a requirement that can, incentivize, the innovators, those startups, to actually try and think of how they tackle that particular problem, how existing tools can add features that would help us, get to that particular point. So I think we're, this is a very important conversation, and hopefully this would start, some sort of an initiative in that direction. So I think that's what we should do. Just raise awareness and have more people talk about it as something that they would like to have that, and in a click, able to see all that fine grain access to different tools and services, have that transparency, so they're not going to be afraid or overwhelmed to actually make a step into that direction.
Romeo, you had a thought in there as Ziv and I were talking.
You mentioned, is there an easy way? I don't know if this is going to be easy. I really don't know if that's in my mind. When I think about easy, I think about convenience. And anytime that I begin to think about convenience, I might be getting lazy here, but I start to think about what's the easiest way that we can get this done. And I don't know if there's going to be an easy way. I kind of think about it like exercise. It's never easy in the beginning, but the more that we stick to a specific plan that is laid out in communication, it might seem like it's getting easier. You're just doing it more and more often. So it might be getting easier, but you're actually doing it the way it's supposed to be done, and you continue to do it on a regular basis.
I'm going to borrow a line that I just saw this like a week or two ago from Robert Herjavec. Choose your hard. Everything's hard. That's it. Everything's hard, but it's just a matter whether it's exercise, cybersecurity, implementing these practices, it's hard. But if you take the time, just choose your hard and then define it. And I thought that was cool. Like, I actually was like, that makes sense.
Yep, absolutely.
But just like exercise, you have to be consistent.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I may exercise 2 or 3 days, and then after that, it's forgotten. So I do think you do have to start really educating the DevOps people about the importance of security. And then as we move to using code libraries, making sure the code that we do reuse is secure before we just continue to populate those vulnerabilities.
It's difficult too, because I think there's a common theme that keeps coming up around, even with DevSecOps, and when we talked about password policy, consistency. Like, that's difficult to keep your foot on the gas from a cybersecurity perspective with the entire team all the time. It's very difficult to just keep your foot on the gas, but it's necessary. We're just losing out on resources because people are getting burnt out. They're tired. I need to pass this to somebody else, and they can't do it. So it's what I'm starting to see in the industry right now.
I think another area we can borrow from is, probably some of us went through like total quality management training in the 90s or 2000s, whatever it was. And, security is not a destination, it's a journey, right? There isn't an end state, right, where you stop, just like quality isn't. And when you're trying to improve quality, and there's lots of aspects to it, just like there are to security, it's an iterative process. You don't solve it in a couple of steps. It's several things that add up. Once in a while, there might be a big thing, but most of it is small steps. And you think about, sort of the checklist mentality we have about security is not how you're going to get there, right? Because then the next thing is that checklist is out of date, or that thing you checked off is out of date. Now you've got to go back and address it. So we have to think about, how do we make this a flywheel, continuous process of how we improve security of our software, the infrastructure that we're operating it on, and this environment we create software in. This year at the AWS Reinforce event, I think it was in February, Chris Betts is a relatively new CISO there, got up and talked about their process, as did their chief security officer. I forgot his name, Charlie something. And they've evolved to a state. They can get there, in a year or two, but they've evolved to a state where they've kind of decriminalized security failures. So really, truly, people don't get fired for that anyway, but there's still a fear of it. But more importantly, they've tried to create a culture where we want people to raise these issues, and there's a forum if it's just not able to be solved in the team you're on because the schedule demands whatever it is. There's a way to escalate it, not to get your boss in trouble or your security architect in trouble, but you feel strongly enough that it needs to be addressed, all the way to the point where, I don't know if this truly happens, but every Friday there's a set of issues that get discussed by teams with the CEO of AWS. because they need some help to try to figure out how to solve it. Those are the really serious things, right? Get to that level. But it's not, we did that for 6 months and it's better and we stopped. It has to be this continuing. And there'll be some other process that they evolve to. So maybe we grab a quality TQM person and security and software and architect and say, how do we start to build this flywheel of how we improve our security? Whether it's, hey, we're using GitHub and I can use GitHub Actions or another tool to say, here's 80 places we have credentials in code. That's easy to fix. Go fix it.
All right, we are running out of time here, as evidenced by our host standing up and starting to move towards me with the shepherd's crook.
Giving us the.
I did want to kind of close out with my thought that I think we're reaffirming that DevSecOps is an important thing and that the focus on security throughout lifecycle of software is important. But that I think tooling is not where it should be at the moment, because we keep coming back to this idea that it's got to be, you're choosing your hard. It's going to be a hard thing to do. And I know when I exercise, it never gets easier to exercise. You just get more done in the exercise. So what we need is tooling that makes it easy. We need part of the software development lifecycle to actually integrate the security foundations right into the tools that are being used to build the software.